From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt back here with the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. It's going to sound a little different today. We have some news to break to you guys. I know Matt Lombardo wanted to break it himself, but it just didn't work out timing-wise. So it turns out last week's episode was Matt's last. He left us at NJ.com. He's going to another venture. We're excited for him, but we're going to miss him for sure. But now we got Darryl Slater back here, whose voice I'm sure you guys remember from last year. We're going to be bringing this podcast to you guys every week. It's going to be me and Darryl for the foreseeable future. I know Darryl is just so excited to talk to me once a week. He tried his best to avoid me during this pandemic, but I think he's excited to be back.
It should be noted that it's Darryl and me, by the way, and that.
God. Okay,
a professional journalist. So yeah, I'm happy to be forced to do this with you. So, but yeah, we'll miss Matt, I guess, a little bit. So yeah, man. So obviously, I don't know if people know, I do a little Jets, a little Giants, mostly Giants lately. Though they have been pretty similar franchises in terms of lack of success lately, haven't they? So
yeah, we're going to talk about that a little later.
Yeah, but so excited to get into it.
So before we continue, as always, make sure you guys are subscribing. We're on all the podcast apps, Apple, Google Play, Spreaker, all that good stuff. Write us reviews and make sure you sign up for our text messaging service, NJ.com/text, so you can get away from the clutter of Twitter and all that stuff. And you can hear from Darryl and me directly, which I'm sure you're very excited about. But we'll get into some Giants. We'll just get right into it. We can look back a little bit at the last game before we look forward. It's a lot of the same problems that they've been having. This team is 0-4. I don't really see much reason to believe they're going to win many games this year, just as I didn't see much reason after last week. But their defense certainly played better. But what was your feeling when you stopped after the end of that game and after we talked to everybody? Like, what was your feeling about the Giants after that loss, Darryl?
Yeah, I mean, just obviously a jarring lack of offensive production or competence on any level. I mean, they've been inept on offense the past two games, 9 points and 6 total field goals in each game. So obviously they're not doing anything on offense. They really miss Saquon Barkley. Their offensive line is a mess. Daniel Jones continues to make some tough decisions and poor decisions in big spots. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? I guess I don't know. Like they're not getting what they need from Jason Garrett in terms of coming up with ways to scheme around their talent deficiencies, which is they knew they had those before he took the job. So obviously they miss Sterling Shepard a ton and they miss Saquon Barkley a ton, but the reality is they're going to have to work with that, just like other teams have to work with that. They're just so thin talent wise, and it all gets back to what you guys have probably talked about a lot and what we've written about a lot, and it's the fact that Dave Gettleman's done a poor job of building this roster. So that's where the Giants are, and they're going to play a team on Sunday and the Cowboys who are reeling, but it's just hard to see the Giants winning this game. And like you said, hard to see them winning many games, but the focus now becomes Daniel Jones for the rest of the year.
Yeah, let's talk about Jason Garrett for a second, because, I thought he deserved maybe a little more benefit of the doubt than he was getting when they hired him, because he obviously comes with a reputation for, everybody always made fun of him for clapping in Dallas, and, they always were disappointing in the playoffs. So, but, in my head, I was thinking, he hasn't actually called the plays in a while, so who knows what he's learned over the last decade or less than a decade, I guess, since he called it in 2012 last, so almost a decade. And then he gets here, and then this offense is just so boring. He doesn't use any creativity. He's not having Daniel Jones throw the ball down the field. I saw a stat that Daniel Jones is throwing the ball down the field on less percentage of his passes than any quarterback in the league, like more than 20 yards down the field, which is just bonkers. They don't really run play action that much, and that's when Daniel Jones is at his best. Like, I just don't see any creativity from this guy. I know the talent's not there, but if you're a good coach, you kind of make do with what you have, especially if they're as high on Daniel Jones as they say. Like, is Jason Garrett, like, from your perspective, is he maybe the biggest disappointment so far in this team? Like, I can't think of many more.
Certainly. I think that's totally fair to say. And I thought I thought it was a reasonable hire. I didn't think he was going to necessarily come in and be a sure thing great coach. And I wrote a couple things saying they should consider him for the head coaching job before they consider Joe Judge, considering the talent or the other candidates that were out there. And then when the offensive coordinator job came open, I thought he was based on the candidates who were available. Probably the best one out there. It's not like there were a ton of great ones, but he was proven. He had called plays before. He had developed a quarterback in Dak Prescott, and he'd been a head coach, so he could mentor Joe Judge in that regard. But yeah, all the things you said are true. You have not seen the sort of inventiveness that you would have hoped for, that you need as a coordinator to kind of paper over some of the talent issues and some of the injury issues that teams always will have in the NFL. So he's been a huge disappointment, and I think he could very well be one and done and could be the fall guy for the season if things don't go as well as they hope, and then maybe they want to bring someone else in for Daniel Jones. The issue then potentially becomes 3 offenses in 3 years, and how much does that impact a young quarterback? So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but he certainly hasn't done a lot to secure his employment so far beyond 2020.
I mean, if you just look at the raw numbers, are just all terrible. Like you and I were texting earlier because I found this like bunker stat that the Jets and Giants are both tied for last place, averaging yards per game. I forget what the total was. It was
I think it was 11-12, right?
Yeah, that's right. That was the total for the 4 games. And the Giants, I believe, are still in last place in rushing because they were so far in last place going into this game. Their offensive line has been bad, as we said, and they haven't scored a touchdown since week 2, and they only have scored 3 touchdowns overall. 3 touchdowns in 4 weeks is just like inexcusable and embarrassing, and
hard to even fathom.
Yeah, it really, like you say it out loud. Like there's Robert Tonyan, the tight end on the Packers, whose name you probably never heard before now, Darryl, scored 3 touchdowns for the Packers the other night.
That's correct.
And he has as many as the Giants have. Like there's people have been making those jokes all week, and they have every right to keep it. It's going to get to the point where it's a cliche, but like this offense is just abysmal. And that is almost entirely on Jason Garrett, but it also is on the other guy who I think we need to talk about, who's kind of tied to Jason Garrett here. And Jason Garrett's job security is tied to him, is Daniel Jones. Sunday was his 16th career start. He lost it, as he's lost most of his starts. He's 3-13 in all of his starts. He's turned the ball over. He's turned it over. I can't remember the number. It's because he turned it over 23 times last year and 7. So 30 turnovers in his career so far. And that's just, I mean, that's the whole thing with him was he needed to fix his turnovers, and he's still making those same poor decisions. He shows flashes of being talented. I guess my main question about him is how do you even evaluate him this year? Because I think on one hand you have like so many things stacked against him. The offensive line is awful. Jason Garrett's not calling plays to get guys open. The receivers aren't getting open. Golden Tate has just been very bad and disappointing in so many ways. Evan Ingram continues to be disappointing. These running backs, they can't do anything if the defense is in the backfield every time they touch the ball. Like, so how much percentage of the blame goes on Daniel? How much is on his circumstances, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is. I mean, at some point you have to overcome the circumstances. You do. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And the best quarterbacks are able to do that. Now, is 16 games enough to say whether this kid has it or doesn't? Definitely not. I mean, I think people still look at Sam Darnold. He just hit the 30 start mark, and the jury's still out on him, and he'll get the rest of this year to prove himself. And I think it's premature to say that if Daniel Jones, unless he has just a disastrous year, it's probably or definitely premature to say the Giants would go after Trevor Lawrence. I think, from a pragmatic standpoint, I know that potentially they'd be firing their GM and have a new GM here. I just don't see ownership okaying drafting another quarterback after giving Daniel Jones 2 years. I mean, I think, and which is fine. I get, look, it worked out fine for Arizona and Kyler Murray, but that was an extreme situation where Josh Rosen was so inept. If you just come out of this year with mediocrity, which is almost a worst case scenario, isn't it? Because ideally, as Giants, you want this guy to light it up, but you want something definitive, right? I mean, you don't want to just come out of it thinking like, oh, well, we still don't know. You want to know. But if you know in the negative way after 2 years, then it will have gone really south. I don't see that happening because I think he has enough ability to at least hover in mediocrity, even with poor talent around him. So then it becomes, what do you do with Trevor Lawrence? What do you do with a high pick? Do you trade out of the pick to get more picks? And I think we're going off on a tangent here, but that might be a good approach given how few picks they have. So Anyway, but I think, yeah, I don't think there's enough around Daniel Jones this year that he's going to necessarily be great. And maybe he will be great. Maybe that's inside him, but I don't think there's enough to draw it out of him this early in his career, because the things around him aren't beneficial enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of he has to play with the cards he's dealt, and there's guys you look at like what Carson Wentz did at the end of last season with all these practice squad guys, and Carson Wentz has regressed this year too, by the way. But you have to, if the best quarterbacks elevate the talent around them. Like it's hard to elevate offensive linemen, like so that's not, he can't do anything about that really, except for not hold on to the ball too long. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion about like what these next 12 games mean for him. It's kind of going to be an audition for the next general manager in theory, because I think you and I are both of the agreement that Dave Gettleman is not long for this job. He does not deserve to keep it any more than he has to this point. He's been awful. The roster is a mess because of him. The offensive line was supposed to be his forte, and he has failed that miserably. So he has 12 games to audition for the next GM, because if they are bad enough that they have the number one pick, that means they were worse than the Jets, who might win 2 or 3 games. Or the Falcons, or like all these other teams. So if the Giants have the number one pick, then that means Daniel Jones probably wasn't very good over the last 12 games. And so now you have to consider, do we view Trevor Lawrence as a superstar? And if that answer is yes, then you kind of have to pick him. And then like the second part of that then becomes like, so how are you filling all the rest of your holes in your roster? And is Trevor Lawrence just going to fall victim to the same things? Because, if they don't improve on the offensive line, if they don't get, better receivers for Trevor Lawrence or whoever the quarterback is, then it's going to be the same thing again. So
yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Yeah, I mean, it's the balance of the importance of quarterback and how much the circumstances around him affect him, and filling roster holes and all the things that a GM of a bad team or rebuilding team has to address. And look, I mean, the Giants, we talked about earlier today, they only have 5 picks because they traded away the 7th round pick for Isaac Yiadom and Leonard Williams, the 5th round pick to the Jets. So potentially they could try to recoup some of those picks at the trade deadline, which then becomes the question of, do you let Dave Gettleman handle the trade deadline?
I was just going to bring that up, actually. Yeah.
So let's get into it then.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so that's kind of like another interesting part of this, like lame duck GMs, like the worst run organ. I mean, you covered the Jets when they did maybe the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in like running an organization, and the Texans kind of folled it up similarly recently.
Let me guess what. All right. Are you going to say the Percy Harvin trade?
No. I'm talking about, of course, when Mike McCagnon was able to run a draft and free agency to sign Le'Veon Bell.
I was thinking trade. Okay, yes.
And he did all these things, and then they fired him. And I've just never heard, like, that's the most Jets thing ever, because no other organization in the right mind would ever do it. The point being, like, okay, and then the Texans did something somewhat similar where they handed Bill O'Brien all this power, let him trade away their best player in DeAndre Hopkins, traded away all their draft picks, and then they fired him 4 weeks into the season. Like the idea that, like, if you're thinking about firing the GM, then you should just fire the GM. Like if there's a chance you're going to fire him, you don't let him go and make moves. So that becomes a problem with Gettleman this year. Like of course, John Mara has to approve it at the end of the day before they go and pull the trigger on anything. But like, do you really want to risk Dave Gettleman botching the trade deadline in the way that he did with that Leonard Williams trade, which, Leonard Williams has played quite a bit better than I expected he would this year. He's actually gotten sacks, which he often struggles to get. But that trade just makes no sense in retrospect, no matter how good he plays this year. He's making $16 million. Like, so are you going to let Dave Gettleman control the trade deadline where he's in theory, GMing for his job? Or like, do you really trust him to trade away these guys to get draft picks? And I certainly don't.
I think we're coming up with some story ideas here. This is a brainstorming session. So, yeah, look, I mean, the trade deadline coming up later this month, and that is a question they're going to have to confront. And then who do you let cut to handle the trade deadline? It's not like you can just hire a GM on the spot.
That's also true.
Kevin Abrams would be the guy, and he would be someone you'd consider for the GM job in the future. But you're potentially, again, letting a guy handle the trade deadline who might not be here if you decide for a full-on house clean. Because
that's a complication. Yeah.
So that's the complicated part of it. And letting a GM handle the trade deadline and then firing him after the year is not nearly as bad as what the Jets did with Mike McCagnon and what the Texans did with Bill O'Brien. But to your larger point, I mean, the GM's role is so far-reaching, obviously, as opposed to a head coach. Letting a head coach work the final 2 games of a season, who cares if he's going to be fired? Whatever, it doesn't matter. like with Adam Gase this year. What difference will it make if they fire him now? Is what everyone's saying, and right. I mean, maybe it won't, but um, should you pull the trigger on the GM quicker or not? I don't know. Look, I mean, I think that they have to figure out. They're not trading Daniel Jones, right? So they wouldn't
No.
be making some franchise altering trade. They would be
Yeah, that's
trading
a good
Evan
point.
Ingram for a mid round pick. I mean,
Yep.
trying to recoup something. These
Yeah,
wouldn't
or like Golden Tate or Jabril Peppers, like one of those guys or whatever.
right
Yeah.
dangling these guys who are not have long term potential, and everyone knows they don't have long term
Yeah,
potential.
and there's a reason why they're available. It's because they're not good enough. So
The more damaging thing would be doing what Gettleman did last year, which it would be, of course, I guess you can never rule anything out, is bringing in a guy and trading away
yeah.
draft picks. So if you're cleaning house, I think that you and I could do that, right? I mean, and everyone would agree it would be a logical move to get rid of Ingram or Tate or Peppers or somebody like that. The guys who are clearly not foundational players, and you try to get some recoup your losses a little bit. This would not be a situation, I would presume, where he would do something like he did last year, which is give away picks for a player in a trade that looks foolish. Unless, look, I mean, barring some miracle run by the Giants, but if the things keep going in this direction, they're surely going to be sellers at the trade deadline.
yeah, I mean the fact that the offense is this bad is entirely on Gettleman in particular. You just look at almost the moves he hasn't made are kind of worse than the moves that he did in a way. Like obviously the Nate Solder move is probably his worst free agent signing. But you look at he didn't add anybody at center, so they're playing a guy who's never played center before. Cam Fleming's the right tackle, and he's been better the last couple of weeks, but he's been a swing tackle for his whole career. And so they were supposed to rebuild the offensive line, and they have a rookie at left tackle who is, as most rookie offensive linemen are, not quite ready, but it's a little more alarming when you look at how good guys like Mekhi Becton have been across the league. And then a wide receiver, this was a historically deep draft class at receiver, supposedly. And a lot of guys are producing as rookies, and Dave Gettleman didn't add a single one. The only receivers he added this offseason of note were Damian Ratley and CJ Board, who were two guys I never heard their names in my life before they were wearing Giants uniforms. And they've kind of showed why that's the case. They just haven't made any impact of note. So you look at like what he hasn't done to support Daniel Jones while he's still in his, like the whole thing in the NFL is if you have your franchise quarterback, you need to capitalize on the window when you're still paying him his rookie money. And Daniel Jones, he still has to develop and all that, but they're not supporting him in the way they need to.
Great point. You look at what the Eagles did with Carson Wentz, and the Rams of Jared Goff. And they made these runs when these guys were still on their rookie contracts, and the Eagles wound up paying off with a Super Bowl. And maybe they don't get a Super Bowl for another 20 years, but people in Philadelphia are going to remember that one forever, obviously. So, yeah, you have to build around a guy like that when you have him. And I hadn't thought about that in a while because you look at Denzel Mims got drafted by the Jets and he hasn't done anything, but that
Yeah,
kind of really
that's
spoke
true.
to. I think he was whatever.
I mean, if you pick the wrong guy, it doesn't matter. It
Right,
almost works, I
but
guess.
to be fair, I mean the Jets
They
took a
tried.
shot at somebody there and they
Yeah.
had a need and they passed on a couple guys, but I think that he was like this whatever number of receiver picked, and there were so many receivers picked high that there certainly was available assets for the Giants in that regard to address a position that probably needed addressing, considering Sterling Shepard's health issues. Darius Slayton's been a productive player considering he was a 5th round pick, but the Golden Tate signing is just so brutal, man. I just Dave Gettleman, the free agency signings have just been bafflingly bad. I mean, Nate Solder and Golden.
The only good ones he had were this year with James Bradbury, who's looked pretty good, and Blake Martinez, but other than that, it's been all bad.
Right. And so the Golden Tate signing coming back to haunt him, they have had so much tied up in the receiver position in terms of cap space and what you're putting into that position. I guess he wasn't willing to pull the plug on Tate just yet, but as you kind of alluded to, Tate's been bad, man. I mean, and probably like the 4th worst thing he's done is get into a fight with Jalen Ramsey in the middle of the field after the game and risking breaking his hand or whatever.
Yeah, and I wrote about this earlier in the week. I was pretty critical of Golden because, the whole idea of them shipping out Odell Beckham a year after giving him a new contract was that they wanted to, clear out the locker room of the malcontents in theory and, help the culture and bring in some professionals. And they were going to rebuild while also trying to win, which never works, and it hasn't worked here. And so they brought in Golden Tate, who was in theory the best receiver on the market, but also had been terrible for the Eagles the previous year. And then he goes and gets suspended for PEDs. I know he had said it had something to do with him and his wife trying to have a baby or something, but the reality is he put the drugs in his system and he was suspended 4 games, so he was unavailable for those games. He was relatively productive last year when he played, but not like number 1 receiver money, which they're paying him. And then this year he missed the first game with an injury. He's been awful when he's played. He has 100 yards, I think, total 105 yards, and then he gets into a fight with Jalen Ramsey. Like they're on the hook. They can cut him after the year, and they almost certainly will. But yeah, like you said, that was just a brutally bad signing. I guess so. We have, it's hard not to be negative about the Giants, but I should say we can be a little positive here and then spin it forward to the next game a little bit. The defense played quite well, shockingly well against the Rams. I did not expect that at all, especially when you looked at their secondary is just banged up. They have a bunch of no-name guys, Adrian Colbert and Ryan Lewis and Isaac Yiadom were playing a lot. And they held the Rams to 17 points, right?
Yeah, they were the number one offense in DVOA, which is Football Outsiders ratings coming into the game.
Yeah, I mean the Rams have Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. They have a few running backs that are explosive. They have some talented tight ends. Their offensive line's pretty good, and the Giants' defense really for 4 quarters just played. They had one really bad mistake on the Cooper Kupp touchdown where nobody was covering them, and I think it was a miscommunication. I think James Bradbury said he messed up on that, and so that was a long touchdown, and that kind of was the difference in the game. But like the defense doing that, and I mean Patrick Graham deserves like so much credit for working with what he has, which again is not really a whole lot of talent. You have James Bradbury, you have a guy like Logan Ryan, a reliable veteran. Blake Martinez can get some tackles, and like Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence are pretty good. But otherwise, you're playing guys like Tay Crowder, who was Mr. Irrelevant. He was playing most of the snaps and looked pretty good. Like they're playing all these no-name guys, and Patrick Graham's like he's like we said, the opposite of Jason Garrett. He's being creative because he doesn't have that much to work with, and it paid off in a way where they shut down a great offense. If they can do that against the Cowboys are a lot more beatable than the Rams in terms because their defense is so bad. So, I mean, I'm not saying I think they're going to beat the Cowboys because I don't, but like Patrick Graham certainly deserves a lot of credit for what he's done.
No doubt. I mean, you look at the coordinator hires that Joe Judge made, and they were going to be so critical because he it's not like he could step in as a life raft and call the offense or call the defense if things started going south. I mean, these guys he was going to roll with these guys as the play callers this year. And you look at the 2 coordinator hires he made, and of course Jason Garrett was the sexy hire, the former Cowboys coach, stays in the division, all that stuff. And then there, Patrick Graham, much more under the radar, a guy who the Dolphins just let go. They, let him say, okay, yeah, sure. Go ahead and take the job.
Yeah.
They didn't really fight to keep him. Brian Flores didn't. And, he came in with a lot of question marks about whether he was going to be able to take a defense that was really bad last year under James Bettcher and have any improvement, especially considering the personnel was so lacking even before the Xavier McKinney injury. You look at this defense and you wonder where are the difference makers, and still you wonder that, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
I think maybe he's doing a little bit of smoke and mirrors, and we'll see if he can continue this. But I think certainly an admirable job so far in terms of production. And we talked about those, DVOA ratings, and Dallas is 12th right now in offense. So, that's a challenge, and Dak Prescott will be a challenge for sure. But as you alluded to, also they're defensively they're 24th. So their defense has struggled. Their offense has been pretty good. But if Patrick Graham can do what he did against the Rams last week, I think that bodes well for the Giants' chances. If they can score more than 9 points, I think they're probably going to have to do that. I'm going on a limb. I think maybe you have to score more than 9 points to win.
Yeah. Before we do like this, our preview and that, I wanted to. So you and I have a story that's coming out. I'll probably come out around the same time this podcast does on Thursday morning. Because I was just thinking about how it's pretty remarkable how the Jets and Giants are almost like the Giants will be the worst team in the NFL if not for the Jets, or you could say vice versa, I guess, because the Jets were more competitive this last week or whatever. But they're just like both miserable, and the New York sports are just so miserable in terms of football right now. And I was just thinking like there's a lot of weird things about both these teams. So like which team has the brighter future? So we kind of went through all the categories, and before we did that, like did you feel like the Giants would come out of the Giants ultimately came out as the one we thought have the brighter future, but was that how you thought it was going to go?
We did 6 categories?
Yeah, 6. I think we did quarterback, coaching stability, front office stability, ownership, talent on the roster, and then future flexibility in terms of like draft picks and salary cap space.
So it wasn't 3-3. I think, didn't we have a push in there? I forget what it was. Anyway,
yeah, we said that the push was on the talent because neither of them have like a lot of elite talent or
right.
any.
And the Giants won 3-2. Then we're not gonna spoil it, even though this comes out about the same time. But yeah, so I don't know what I would have thought. I mean, I think ownership probably puts the Giants over the top just because the Jets under Woody and Christopher Johnson have been so bad, and not like
You
John
can't be
Mara
worse than that.
has done, a lot recently. But yeah, and the quarterback thing, obviously, mainly only because Daniel Jones is younger, a year behind Sam Darnold. Does he get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt? But you talk about how bad these teams have been. They're both 0-4 this year, obviously, and since 2017, the start of 2017, the Giants are 12-40 and the Jets are 16-36. And since the start of 2016, the Giants are 23-45 and the Jets are 21-47. That's insanely bad. I mean,
Wild.
they're two of the worst teams in the NFL since 2016 and since 2017. And you remember the Giants were obviously good in 2016. So even if you include that year, they're 23-45. Even if you include the year they were good in 2016. So obviously a dismal stretch. I mean, this reminds people of the 70s who have followed both of these teams for a while, and this will be 17, 18, 19, 20, fourth straight year that both these teams missed the playoffs, because it's not happening for these teams this year. And who knows how long it's going to continue. It's tough to envision either of these teams being in the mix for the playoffs next year. So even with the extra wild card spot, so the long-term future, we talk about which team is brighter. Maybe the Giants are brighter, but by long term, we certainly mean beyond next year. So don't get your hopes up for next year. I don't know. I mean, I feel, I guess we're naturally pessimistic, but that feels realistic, if anything.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is they're kind of like the flip side in a few different ways. Like you look at like Adam Gase is almost certainly on the way out, but Joe Douglas, I think we can both say, is probably pretty safe because he hasn't really had a chance to build that roster yet. And then you look at the other side of it, and Dave Gettleman's almost certainly gone, and Joe Judge is safe. So you look at the coach and GM, like it's flip flop there.
And the issue the Jets have run into in that regard in terms of rebuilding is having coach and GM on a different track, and the Giants are going to get into that, and the Jets are going to get into that. I mean, it's probably better to fire your coach and then let your GM hire the new coach rather than what the Giants probably are going to be getting into next year. And that's exactly what happened in 2013 when the Jets paired John Idzik, the new GM, with the incumbent coach Rex Ryan, and they did not get along, and the relationship was very poor, and they both lasted 2 more years. They were gone after 2015. The Jets hit the reset button with Todd Bowles and Mike Maccagnan in 2015, and that didn't work out. But usually you want to hire both guys at the same time or keep your GM and fire your coach. What's going to happen with the Giants next offseason is not ideal, likely going to happen. And so it's on John Mara to find someone who can work with Joe Judge, because he wants Joe Judge to be the future. So I think that that's critical. I mean, it's kind of an obvious point to say you don't want a GM who doesn't get along with your head coach, but it would seem that the situation the Jets are probably going to be in with that job search is perhaps a slightly more enviable than the Giants.
Yeah, and I think the Jets have a more obvious path to like improving their roster, although you can never like count on the Jets doing the right things. They have a lot more cap space coming up. They have a lot more draft picks, especially after that Jamal Adams trade, although you have to look at it from the lens of they gave away a guy in Jamal Adams who they're probably not going to get a player that good. And so I think that part of it's interesting. Like the Giants, they have a little less cap space than I realized until we did this, because you have to factor in that Nate Solder's contract was pushed back a year because they were looking forward to being able to cut him after this year, I think. So now you have to pay Nate Solder next year. So I think they're only projected currently to get $15 million in cap space or something like that.
Wow.
You mean you can make guys like
Tate and...
yeah, you can make some of it up, but then the question is like what the salary cap is even going to be, because there's no fans in the stands, so the revenue is going to be way down. And so I mean it can only drop. There's like a threshold, I think 175 million or something like that. But like the Giants don't have as obvious of a path to like filling all their holes, which kind of goes back to the earlier discussion we had of like, so do you pick Trevor Lawrence or do you fill a need kind of thing? And that's kind of they really, whoever the next GM is, he's going to be under pressure to like, he needs to get every free agent he signs right and every draft pick he signs right, because they don't really have enough like leeway to get creative.
Dave Gettleman will have left a fairly bare cupboard, just like Mike Maccagnan did for Joe Douglas, and that, I guess that's what happened.
And Jerry Reese did for him, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what happens. That's how you get fired as a GM.
Yeah, exactly. You're not getting fired if you're leaving them with a good roster. All right, let's transition back into, let's look ahead to this weekend before we wrap up. So they have the Cowboys in Dallas. The NFC East, insanely, the Giants are 0-4, and you could say they're still in the division race. This isn't a team that's going to compete for the division, but the NFC East is just such complete trash that the Eagles are at the top with a 1-2-1 record. But they're going to be going to Dallas, a defense that has allowed, I think, at least 39 points each of the last 3 weeks. So if the Giants were ever going to get their get-right offensive game, you would hope it would come this week. I'm more concerned with Giants defense against a very explosive Cowboys offense with Dak Prescott, and they have three receivers that are really good in Cooper, Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, and their offensive line's always really good. And so I'm not as confident the Giants defense can stop them again, though the Cowboys haven't really been all that inspiring. What's your feeling going into this game in general?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those points. I had not looked at that, but the Cowboys gave up 49 last week against the Browns, and then 38 the week before against Seattle, and then 39 in a win over the Falcons in week 2. So, and then week 1 they gave up 20 points and a loss to the Rams. So it's been a rough year in Dallas, and it's funny to hear people after the Cowboys game talk on Sunday about, maybe it wasn't all Jason Garrett's fault in Dallas. And then the 4 o'clock games roll around, but maybe it actually is all Jason Garrett's fault in New York that the offense is terrible. So
Well, that's the funny part. Like I was thinking about that because everybody from the Cowboys has been pointing out Jason Garrett never started 1-3, and I'm thinking like, all right, we should calm down. Just look at what's going on in New York, where he has the worst offense in football. Like
yeah.
maybe he was better at like not letting it bottom out in Dallas, but I don't know that he's a better offensive coach than Mike McCarthy. Certainly.
Well, you have more to work with, no doubt. More to work with in Dallas. Jason Garrett did, and the criticism of him is going to be what it was of McCarthy in Green Bay and what it could be of McCarthy in Dallas, which is didn't get enough out of the talent. They certainly have the talent, and the criticism of Jason Garrett there was he didn't get enough out of it, and maybe that'll be the case with McCarthy here as it was for McCarthy in Green Bay. But with Garrett in the Giants, he's going to have to do this if he's going to be successful with a lot less talent. So. Jason Garrett, the first time ever coaching in Dallas as a visiting coach. And he was only in Miami 05, 06 as quarterback's coach. And then he goes 07 to Dallas and continues on there from, a position coach all the way up to coordinator and then head coach. So it's a place that's special for him. Obviously, I guess some fans will be there. I don't know what the deal is with that, but it will surely feel like zero fans with how big that stadium is. But yeah, if the number one issue for the Giants is their offense, and it is, the number one gripe in Dallas is their defense. So I think it's an interesting juxtaposition here of like you said, an opportunity for the Giants to get right against a team that defensively is struggling as much as they are the Giants are offensively. And look, if Garrett can't put up some points on his old team here, you wonder whether he's going to be able to do much of anything this year.
Yeah. So the Cowboys, their defense is not as we mentioned, it's not good. They do have some pass rushers though, and that has me concerned because the Giants' offensive line obviously has been playing pretty well. I haven't done my score prediction for this week yet. If I had a gun to my head, I probably would say the Cowboys win something like, I don't know, 31-20 or something like that. I think the Giants can keep it relatively close against this team, but I just don't think talent wise they match up.
Yeah, I picked it already because I'm not a slacker about turning in my picks. I picked it Cowboys 21, Giants 10. Put very little thought into the final score as usual. Let's be honest here. I'm not sitting here for hours ruminating over a final score for our pick, but 21-10 Cowboys Giants. Maybe that's a little steep. I looked at the line that our guy who does the picks sent out, and it was 9.5. So that's a slight cover there. I mean, maybe you look at that line and say, geez, 9.5, but the Giants are bad, man. They're really bad. And anyone listening to this knows that. So it's not news to anybody. But I don't see it. I don't see this offense getting going against many, if any, opponents this year for the Giants.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. Since we're towards the end of the podcast, I can do a little media complaining, which I'm sure people love hearing. But one thing I was just thinking about as we were talking is that I already hated that I had to miss the LA trip last week, and I hate that the Dallas Cowboys press box is maybe the best one that I've covered games in. They have like snacks and desserts and great food, and there's obviously more crappier things going on in the world, but I will miss being there. I'm going to be sitting on the couch.
That's probably the second most crappy thing going on in the world. The pandemic, and then you not being able to go to Dallas.
Thank you. I'm glad.
It's great. I mean, the press box food is great, and then Pecan Lodge downtown Dallas and the Deep Ellum area has got some great little bars and restaurants. And I will say I've not been to Pecan Lodge, and I would love to go. But Fort Worth there on my only trip, and ate some great barbecue and a little divey place in the middle of nowhere north of Fort Worth. That was awesome. And it's a great trip as long as you don't stay anywhere near the stadium and you stay in Dallas or you stay in Fort Worth, and you can have a lot of fun. I mean, look, man, I mean, these trips are tough to miss. I mean, obviously you get the Dallas trip every year in the division, but
Yeah.
like I said, I'm sure you guys have talked about it, the LA trip, the Seattle trip.
I mean, fans are losing these too. Like, it's not only us. So, like, I know there's a lot of Giants fans who like going to the cool road games, and they're not the only fan base that does that. So, hopefully, we get to go back to some games next year. But it's been very strange, like watching these games from home, the road games lately. Watching from home, it's a very different experience. I'm not used to.
Yeah, like I don't know. I mean, you're watching on your TV, but I don't think people know necessarily. So with you living in the Philadelphia area, you're not getting a lot of these games
Yeah.
on TV. So we're having to find, let's just say, alternative ways to watch the games on our laptops. And I live in I live in central New Jersey, so I'm able to I'm be in the Giants coverage area and get the games, but even still, I'm sitting in the basement where I'm doing this right now, and I'll watch my games on my own laptop, while watch the games on my laptop on Sundays in the in the basement, so I'm not disturbing the baby upstairs. So it's quite different than being in the press box, watching on the 13-inch screen. But I think maybe people have seen a little bit of the benefit of, you can learn quite a bit on TV. I really do think, and maybe this is cynical, that football is a really overrated sport to watch in person. I'm happy to go to the games and I like doing it, but you miss a lot in person. You really do. And in that, watching on TV with the benefit of replays does that a lot, and it helps to a degree, but no free press box food. So,
And I will say, even just being at the stadium, like especially at MetLife, which, as I know the fans agree with this, is like the most boring stadium in the NFL, maybe. Boring, not worst stadium. There's worse stadiums. Anyway, it's just like, so it doesn't even feel like a NFL regular season game sitting there. I don't know what your feeling was, but like it feels like a scrimmage almost, because there's just like no energy. There's no excitement when a touchdown happens. It just kind of happens, and then the next thing happens, and you just look up, and all of a sudden the game's almost over, and nobody's going crazy at the end. Like it's just like such a weird thing.
I miss the booze. I do. I would love
Yeah.
to. I would love to see, even the emotion and the reaction of whatever. I mean, certainly we don't care how the Giants do, win or lose, but just the visceral emotion of, man. I mean, the expectations were so low for the Giants this year that if they were doing well, people would be especially overjoyed about it. And given the start that in reality has happened, I'm sure people would be just gnashing their teeth over what's happening,
Yeah.
and rightfully so. And that's the stuff that you miss going to games, the energy. And it's not the same. I mean, on TV they have, as people know, they have the fake audio, but that doesn't really exist in the stadiums. Just to give people an idea, it's a low hum that goes on throughout the game, and you barely even notice it. It's not that loud.
Yeah.
Especially with a press box that's closed in, and most NFL press boxes are not open air, so we barely hear it. So we don't hear what you guys are hearing on TV, which is the TV added simulated sound to kind of, when there is a touchdown, to have that loud uproar. So, I can't even imagine what it would be like covering this game in that stadium in Dallas, given how cavernous that place is, or I should say, just large.
That place is, I've gotten lost there many times, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awfully cool stadium, but like you said, hopefully back on the road sooner rather than later.
For sure, man. All right, we'll wrap it up on that note. As always, make sure you guys are subscribing. We're on all the podcast apps. Write us a review, send us some tweets. And we're gonna get another podcast for you guys next week, and maybe the Giants will get their first win on Sunday, even though we both don't think that's gonna happen. But we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for listening, guys.